So we're just going to go from the start there. Sorry, we lost our sound right off the top there. So welcome everybody to our presentation on working with MapInfo data in FME. I'm Mark Stokes, and with me we've got Dean Hintz.
Hi.
And we've also got Laura Kersons here, who's going to be helping us answer any questions you might have during the webinar. For those of you that don't know us, we're Safe Software. There's 100 of us here in Vancouver offices, in well, Metro Vancouver, we should say, because we're actually in Surrey, which is a large suburb of the Vancouver area. So this morning, what we're going to be working through is, within the 60 minutes that we've allocated, is working with FME and MapInfo data. We're going to have a look at some examples of loading and exporting data from MapInfo, using FME to do some data transformations to help you get the best out of your MapInfo data. And along the way, we're going to be doing some demos of the data. We're also just going to introduce some ideas around our other product called FME Server and how that might be used with your MapInfo workflows. The webinar is going to be recorded, and the materials will be put up on our website. You'll get a follow-up email, so if we go too fast or if you want to look at some of the examples that we work through, they will be made available to you, and you'll get the link in a follow-up email. We encourage you to fire off some questions. That's why we've brought Laura in here early this morning. So at the bottom of your GoToMeeting panel there is a questions panel, and you can add some questions in there, and Laura and I will try and resolve them for you. If we can't get an answer right away, we will follow up with a follow-up email. So the FME technology, we are basically a data translation toolkit. And we started out reading and writing CAD and GIS kind of data, expanded that into working with spatial databases. And then over the years, we've been adding different spatial contexts to the format support that we support. That includes raster data, web kind of information like XML, and then we've expanded that to 3D and BIM data, and then more recently we've been adding point cloud information. And so around that idea of the different spatial contexts we work with, what we need to be able to do is transform the data from one place to another so that we get the best out of that data. And that's a large part of the functionality of FME, is the transformation tools that allow you to get the best out of the data in the different spatial contexts that you work in. This is just our ever-expanding format lists from our first product. So the number of formats just steadily keeps on growing. It's actually a little bit more than the 270-odd formats that we support in FME 2012, because we do have partners who have developed formats as plugins for FME. There's probably about 25 or 30 of those, I would think. So the number of formats that we do support steadily keeps growing. But although we can very easily plug into different formats, the crux of moving data between one format and another is the data transformation. And that is the cornerstone of data interoperability, being able to get the best out of the data in the different spatial contexts you're working in. So if you're going from a GIS database to a CAD file, you need to be able to get the best out of the data, but in that CAD representation. And this involves restructuring the data, either the feature types, which are the tables, layers, or those equivalents, moving attribute names and renaming those, rejigging domains or enumerated lists, and in some cases restructuring the geometry of the data. We have two primary products here at Safe Software, the FME Desktop, which is where you build the workflows that dictate how those translations are going to behave. And then the FME Server, which sits on top of the desktop tools and allows a broader audience of users to do those spatial transformations. And we're going to be focusing on desktop in this webinar, but Dean will introduce the FME Server slightly. So just to make sure everybody's awake here and that we're awake as well, we're going to have our first poll question. And we just want to find out the kind of usage of FME. And so up we come here with the first poll. I'm just going to launch that. And we'll give you a couple of minutes if you can just respond to how you're using FME. We'll give you a couple of minutes here. A big spread today on the usage of FME. So I'm just going to close the poll now, and then I will share those results with you. And so it's a big spread today. So about a quarter of us on this webinar, and it looks like there's about 70, 80 people sitting in on the webinar. About a quarter of us have not used FME before, so welcome to joining us. Quite a lot of new users and some well-seasoned users with us as well.
Okay, thanks Mark for that intro and getting us started on the right foot now that everybody can hear us. Yeah, so now we'll jump into a little bit more detail about the FME components and then see how that all ties in together with MapInfo. Just to get started, just in case for those of you that are new that we saw from the poll, I'll just walk you through what FME is in terms of workbench. On the current slide, you can see what Workbench lets you do. On the left side, you can see where the data sources are, in this case a CSV file. And on the right side, we're using this to load a series of MapInfo tables. And in between, we have what we call transformers, which are the data processing or functions that help prepare the data for the output. So essentially, it's a point-and-click spatial data transformation tool. And in this case, really enables you to load a very wide range of data sources into MapInfo, as well as export MapInfo data so that the wider world can consume it. One of the other key components is the universal viewer and the data inspector. And we don't purport that this is any kind of GIS, but the intent of these tools is really to let you view your data, the underlying data structure and the geometries, so that you can see that you have everything that, you know, all the details of the data itself. And a key point here is that this allows you to inspect your data at each stage of the transformation process. So you don't just see the final output, but if there's a problem in between, you can discover that with the viewer. And sometimes people go, well, you know, my GIS doesn't show these underlying problems. It kind of fixes the view. Well, our whole purpose with the inspector and the viewer is to kind of show the data, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. So another poll.
Oh, we've got another poll here. So just because we're talking about MapInfo today predominantly and using FME within the MapInfo family, so we've got a poll here that is asking what versions of MapInfo you're using. If you're using more than one, you can select more than one there. So the percentage is not totally accurate, I guess. Okay, everybody's answered pretty quickly there. All right, so I'm going to close that poll and we'll have a look at the results there, which is kind of interesting. So a good chunk of you all updated to the latest version of MapInfo. So the MapInfo folks are fairly lucky because in some cases when people have a GIS, some of the more heavyweight GIS applications, takes them a long time to upgrade to the newest version. So it looks like a lot of people are skipping MapInfo 11, going straight from 10 to MapInfo 11.5. And I think, Dean, you're going to be looking at 11.5. Is that the one that you're running?
Yeah, I do have the latest and greatest, so hopefully it's had the bugs ironed out by now.
Okay.
So we'll see. So FME and MapInfo, what everybody is here for. I guess I'll spend a considerable amount of time looking how to load data into MapInfo with FME, seeing as that's often the big part of any major project. And so to begin with, we'll look at the FME functionality that you get within MapInfo. And then we'll look also at extending MapInfo with FME and loading data that way with FME and FME Workbench. And finally, exporting data out. So in terms of the main formats that we support all the main MapInfo formats. MIF-MID, that's primarily considered an interchange format for third-party applications. And so you can certainly read and write that data with FME.
It's somewhat equivalent to the old DXF kind of format for AutoCAD users, isn't it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an ASCII-based format for MapInfo.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you may not get the same performance as with a tab file, but it is pretty comprehensive. And then with tab, we have this can be a little bit confusing because there's two libraries. There's MFAL, which is the native MapInfo tab reader and writer, and then there's MyTab, which is the open source. And you can get a bit of debate back and forth which one is better. I guess they each have their own strengths. So the MFAL has perhaps a better spatial index, and MyTab, because it's open source, it has a wider community that have contributed to it, so it supports things like MDB and 64-bit. So that, perhaps with 64-bit FME, could be useful if you're dealing with large data. Now this will reveal some of my, I don't have a huge amount of historical background. I wasn't using MapInfo 10 years ago, but apparently spatialware was a major database format for MapInfo for quite some time, but I believe the last release was back in 2006. So that's 4.9. There's been maintenance releases since then, but I think that's the last major one. So since then, a lot of people seem to be using SQL Server Spatial, and I'll note that that was recently improved just now in 2012. So SQL Server now has it's much easier to use the spatial indexing, and we'll look a little bit at that later. As well as SQL Server Spatial is one of the few databases that has two true geographic types. And then Oracle Spatial is also quite commonly used. So why don't we have a quick look at the Universal Translator and how that works. So I'll just pop up MapInfo. So right off the top, you'll see here, if I look at the tool manager, there's a checkbox for the Universal Translator. I have that checked, so if you don't have that checked, it won't show up. And if I Universal Translator. So this will give me the formats that are available, and you can see it's primarily just DWG, and then a couple of Esri formats, Esri Shape, and DGN, as well as VPF. So I'll just look for some DWG data.
So you're using FME data, which is our ubiquitous FME training data based on the city of Austin, Texas.
That's correct. So you can see there's a water distribution network file. I'll just double click on that. Now you'll notice there's no settings here. So if I wanted to interpret that in a particular way, a particular schema, I don't really have a lot of options. So okay, so I'll just click OK. I'll find a file directory. So that goes away and crunches and translates the data.
So that's moving that into a tab file that you can then load into the MapInfo?
That's correct, yeah. So that's one way to bring data in, and now you'll notice that everything has to go to a tab file, or I'll try a different directory here. Probably shouldn't work there. Yeah.
Select your
try that. Maybe I had a permissions issue there where I was writing it. So as I was saying, everything has to go to MapInfo or from MapInfo. So you can't just do a translation from, let's say, DWG to shape. I'm not going to wait too much longer there. Okay, so now it says successful. So now if I go File, Open, I think I just dropped that under FME Data. Yeah, so you can see the DWG file.
And you're getting one tab file for every layer that was in the AutoCAD file.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So I just opened up one of them.
Yeah, so those are the water meters.
Yeah. Okay. Now another way of bringing in data is with the open universal data, and I noticed that most of you are running MapInfo 9 or above. I believe that's when the universal data became available. This is a little bit more flexible because you'll notice that the dialogues look a lot more like FME. They basically are dialogues. Now I've already extended this, so I'm getting the full format list. I'll show you how that's done in a minute. And so if, yeah, for sake of argument, if I wanted to open up the same data set, go back to well, let's do something different. Let's open up some GML.
Yep, so you get the full parameter set that the full FME readers use so that you can change the behavior of the readers as you read that data in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point, Mark. So there's a lot of times when the settings are critical to interpret how you want to see the data. Particularly, let's say with CAD, you can have an attribute schema, or you can bring it in by geometry type. So.
Not that one, you want the zones.
Still processing. And I think the difference here also is that it does bring it directly into MapInfo. So it is saving it to a file, but you don't have to go to the disk to find it. So there's the data.
All right. And it's got all the attribution on it, I assume?
I assume so. If I click on the info tool, I can see yep. Individual record there.
Okay.
So that's FME from within MapInfo. And just as a quick review, those are the formats that are supported. And yeah, so we have the Universal Translator and Open Universal Data. There are some limitations there. I mean, as you noticed, probably speed. It's probably a little bit slower. We have to wait there for it to come in. Also, I've noticed playing around with things like Inspire data, the error handling is a bit more opaque, so if something goes wrong, you won't necessarily get an error message on the screen. It just won't work. And so then if you do have FME and you can go back to FME Viewer and inspect the data directly, then you'll be able to find out exactly what's wrong. Also, there are other formats like GeoDatabase, which will show up only if you have ArcInfo installed. So extending, how do we extend with FME? If I go, basically I just have to go to my FME folder. In this case, I'm doing everything today on FME 2012 Service Pack 4. And if I go to Utilities, Integration Console, you'll see that I've extended with 11.5 with FME 2012. So I could hit revert and extend, but we don't want to wait for that. And so this will tell you exactly what version of MapInfo is extended and which build of FME has been used to extend it. As you may have noticed, I have more than one FME installed. It is important that FME and MapInfo be installed on the same machine for that to work. Okay, so another poll question.
Okie dokie, here we go. So, what FME tools do you use the most? If not all of them, I guess. Okay, so that's interesting. So the vast majority of people are using FME standalone, and quite a few of you using the older MUT, as we used to call it, MapInfo Universal Translator. I'm going to close that and then share the results. So yeah, we've got a lot of people here just using FME standalone, quite a few people using MapInfo Universal Translator, and I wonder if that's actually a large chunk of the people that aren't using FME in that earlier poll, and perhaps are using the MapInfo Universal Translator but don't realize that it's FME technology sitting underneath that.
That's right.
That's another question we can ask at a different time.
So we'll look at some examples, and I realize this is limited by time, so I may not get to everything. But whatever examples I don't get to today, we will make those available via link when we send out. We'll have a link to the presentation materials as well as these examples, so you can certainly try these at home later. So we'll look at loading CAD data into MapInfo, and then we'll also look at reading some CSV file, like we saw that snapshot earlier. And and then a quick nod to some of the other formats the many formats that FME can consume, like Raster, database, and GML. So we saw that DWG file. And so how can we load data like that into MapInfo? So I've got slides on that for reference for you later, but I'll go right into the workspace itself. So I'll just walk you through what this workspace is doing before I run it. Basically, the challenge with loading CAD data into GIS, and this is common with MapInfo as well as other GIS formats, is that the CAD world is very much drawing-oriented, line-oriented, for example, and the GIS world is more table-oriented. And so what we have to do is we have to associate and build features that make sense in the GIS world. So you can see here we read the source CAD data, and then we have to extract properties, because the other thing about CAD is that there's a lot of style information embedded in the graphics. Maybe it's line type, text labels, things like that. So we have to group that information according to the features we want to build. And down here in the area builder, we're taking line work and associating them with polygons. So we're closing all the polygons that we can. And then we have tools like the point on area overlay, and that allows us to take the center point label, transfer the information from that label, such as a parcel ID, onto the polygon. Then we go to an external database and we do a join, in this case with an access table, to add even more attribution. So if I move this over, you can see the fields that that's bringing in, things like land use and source and land use codes, block ID. All of that's done using the parcel ID that we got from the point on area overlay. And finally, and we'll spend a little more time on this later, things like schema mapping. So how can we map from the source schema to the destination schema? And that's critical because often people think about FME primarily as a data translation tool, and we always make the point that transformation really is the key to a successful translation. If you can't transform your data, you can't get the source data to match the destination schema that you want. So I'll just go ahead and run this, and then we can see exactly what it's doing. At the end there's a couple of validation steps, which again later, if we have time, I have a lot of examples that we can see a bit more sophisticated validation. In this case, all it's doing is looking at using the area calculator to figure out, are those polygons meaningful or not. If they're too small, then it's probably some kind of a sliver. And so you can see there's the output, and in the universal viewer, and if I right click on the MapInfo destination, because we're talking about loading MapInfo, and I can show open containing folder, and then I can just drag this into open with MapInfo, bring that up in MapInfo. So there's the parcel map that we've created, and if we inspect that, we can look at the individual parcels and see that we have closed polygon geometry with all of those attributes associated with them. So we're ready to use that in MapInfo and style it. And I will apologize ahead of time that I am not really a cartographer. I know a lot of MapInfo users really pride themselves on beautiful maps. My focus is mostly on the data, getting you the data you need, and then if that's your job, is make it look pretty. But anyway, the data is there, and the parcels and their attributes. Okay. And I think that's a good first example because it walks through some key elements of data preparation with the geometry processing, attribute processing, and schema transformation, and finally validation. So just kind of remember those steps, because that is often the case, both loading data into MapInfo, but also when you export from MapInfo to other formats. MapInfo is a bit more forgiving than, say, GeoDatabase. You can combine different geometries in the same table. In other formats you can't. So that often you do need to do things like validation even when you export. Okay, so there's the output. Now a couple of words about database. You can write, you can use FME to load SQL Server and other database formats like Oracle, and we do have support for the older spatialware. And you'll notice here there's I do have specify a key column and a geometry column. and those seem to be column names that MapInfo likes. So I'm somewhat new to playing with SQL Server and MapInfo, but I did manage to get it to work. So we'll have a look at that in a bit more depth in a minute. Now the next workspace I want to run is just reading non-spatial data. So often we think about FME as transforming CAD and GIS data, but also it's very good at reading non-spatial data. That might be from a text file or XML or even something off the internet. Here you can see we have XY values with a road ID. So really what we want to do is convert the XY to a point and then group those points by road ID. So let's have a look how that works. And I'm going to probably have to remember to close some of these, otherwise they're going to pile up. And again, if I go through these a bit quick because of our limited time, you will have access to these later, so you don't have to, take rapid screenshots or anything. You'll be able to download these. So here's that source data, and remember, this is not spatial in any way. It's just a CSV file. It could be an Access or an Excel table. I know that Excel tends to be pretty popular with MapInfo users. So the first stage of this workspace is, well, we got to create some geometry. Can't do too much with it until we actually have some geometry. And so we have a point adder, which generates points from the XY coordinates. And then we connect the point using road ID. So that's key. Otherwise, we get a big bird's nest if we don't break those lines.
That's kind of like the old pen plotters. You have to tell it when to pick the pen up and go to the next line.
Yeah. And then we have a reprojector here just to get things into lat long. And then ultimately we use this joiner again because at the beginning all we have is a road ID, which is not that interesting. So we go to an external access table, and that's got a wizard behind it. But if I just open up the joiner on the left here, I should highlight this, that in the main canvas where I've been working over here on the right, that's essentially like our data flow diagram. On the left, we have a tree view of the same thing. So we can explore the settings underneath any one of these. And the key here is that I'm joining based on road ID to retrieve these fields from the database. And don't let that list of parameters scare you. That's why we have a wizard to walk you through setting that up. And then, because we actually want to have different layers based on an attribute value, then we use an attribute filter to break that apart, major, minor, and rural roads. And then I'll let this run, and we'll talk a little bit more about styling in a minute. Ultimately, that gets us the MapInfo tables on the output. So these each have the same fields, but they're different. They're grouped by road category. So I'll let that run. Now while that's running, this kind of leads us to the next step. And I know we talked about in the title, we're talking about transformation, but we can't really separate transformation from the whole process of translation, import, and export. Transformation is part of all of that. And one of the things that we need to do for MapInfo, certainly to make our maps a little prettier than the previous one we saw, we need to do some styling. So why don't I look at the output first. Open containing folder. I think, is that new in 2012?
That was added in 2012. Yeah,
yeah,
it's really
it's quite handy. So I think what I'll do is I'll open this first from MapInfo, and let me close everything that's open. So this is GPS to roads. Now there's the output we've just generated. So there's the output we've created. We can have a table view of that as well. Let's just pick one of those so we can see that. In fact, we have all of the associated attribution. So how did we get that styling? It's not perfect. We could play around with the labels a bit, but you can see it looks a little bit better than what we had before. And we have a little bit more control. So there's really three main approaches that we took to styling that. And the first is the color setter. So there's a range of transformers which just operate on features generically, independent of format. So color setter is one of those. We actually, those of you who've used FME for a while will remember the pen color setter, area color setter. We've combined that into one. And here you can either set RGB values, you can pick it off of this color palette, or you can manually put the values in if you've read it off a feature, for example. So that's one way, and that's how I set the red color for the major roads. In terms of the minor roads, we have a new tool. I believe it's new in 2012, Mark? Is that when
enhanced, I think. It's been around for a minute.
Okay, so we enhanced it. And so here you'll see that you have access to a full range of MapInfo specific symbology, as well as the MapInfo line patterns. So these are all native to the MapInfo format you'll see in the MapInfo documentation. So they're those exact codes.
And for areas there, well, with L, you haven't got any areas, but all regions in MapInfo, you've also got access to the patterning for regions as well. There they are. You brought them up there.
That's exactly right. So really, you have full control over that. And what the nice thing about it is, then you don't have to remember all of the underlying format attributes, which we'll look at in a minute. You can just configure it with this GUI. It makes life a lot easier.
Or make a cartography of you yet, Dean.
Well, it'll take a little bit more work, but yeah, at least it holds my hand a bit when I'm trying to do that. So that's how I colored those two. Now, in terms of the rule roads, actually, I have an attribute creator where I manually, or not manually, but I specifically set the MapInfo pen color pattern and width. And now, where did I get those values? Initially, I kind of cheated. I'll let you know because I don't know these codes off the top of my head. So I actually used the styler to create the style I wanted, and then I grabbed the values from the viewer and pasted them in the creator. Now, why would I go to that trouble? Well, one reason is that maybe you want to have a whole list of colors and patterns stored somewhere, like in a lookup table. Well, then it helps to have direct programmatic control over those values. And so, and there are other ways of doing this. You could apply this with the attribute value mapper or even a schema mapper. And last but not least, the labels we did with the MapInfo styler again. So that's the back up to the top here. No, where is the text? At the bottom. There we go. So Arial, nothing too fancy there. So just going back, you can see how we applied all of those styles. And you know, I'll give a nod now, and also later on. Our great partner, well, of ours, David Eagle, with One Spatial. He has a very good presentation, and he spends quite a bit of time on styling. So I highly recommend that. So we'll give you that URL at the end if you want to dig a bit more into the wonderful world of styling for MapInfo. Okay, moving along. So just a quick review then, the three styling options are the generic styling that you get with FME, so color setter, for example, the MapInfo styler, and just as a reminder, there are other styler transformers when you get to the exporting, because we have DWG and other stylers, and then finally attribute creator for for setting, explicitly setting the specific attribute values. And there are some of the format attributes that you can set. That doesn't, it's not all of them, but these you can find in the documentation for the writer. And actually, a very good way to find these also is just to open up the viewer, open up a tab file. So if you have a tab file, you could say a template or that has the styles you want, you can inspect it and find out which fields are being set to generate that style. Okay, now moving on to other data types. I do have one quick example of reading raster data. I'm not sure if I'll actually run this, but here what we have as an input is actually a DEM. Now I know you can load overlays, raster overlays into MapInfo and display them in the background. But in terms of actually processing the data, FME can be quite helpful because what in this case it's doing, FME is reading the raster and then essentially classifying it and converting it to polygons. And so there's, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, we're classifying it, then we're vectorizing it, and then we do some generalization and styling to present it. So I can just bring that up quick. So here are the tables that we've created, and this data was all generated from an underlying elevation raster. And I won't run the translation right now because it takes a little bit of time, but you can see it does actually a pretty good job. We'll just kind of zoom in there in a second. So we basically created elevation bands, and so these are actually individual polygons that have been interpolated from the raster. And if I click on one of these points, you can see what the elevation is there. And if I turn off the ramped version, under that we actually have more of a random color. So if you really want more of a psychedelic approach, you need to be woken up in the morning, maybe that's a better display. And you can see that we have the labels on top. So just again to remind people that FME does do a good job with raster. Other area that's fairly new is LiDAR. So you could build tins and contours and things like that from LiDAR. Surface models. We don't have time to get into that today, but really any kind of spatial data that you can imagine, FME can probably handle it. Okay, moving on. Now back to, I did mention briefly SQL Server. I just wanted to show you this again. So I took that earlier example I have and I added a SQL Server writer, and then I why don't I go ahead and run that while I'm talking. So this is the same CAD to GIS workspace as before, except that I have a SQL Server writer on it. And what I had to do there is specify the geometry column, and I added a MI style column as well, and an index column. And here in the format parameters, you can see where I specified the geometry column. Now, just to see, let's call this O2. I'm going to go ahead and run that. So what I found this a little bit not entirely intuitive to figure out, because you do have to make these spatially enabled. It doesn't happen automatically. So I just ran still running there now. It's not a big table, so it shouldn't take too long. So it's popping up the results in the viewer just as a, again, to monitor what's going on. But it says translation successful. So now when I go to MapInfo, I can open a DBMS connection. And I just select my, my local SQL Server. And then I can just go to the regular open dialog, and you're going to see the SQL Server is available there. And the table I just created is parcels 02. Now this just comes up as a table only. So to actually see it as a map, this is the part I had to dig a little bit in the docs. Then you actually have to go to the table menu, maintenance, and you can make it mappable. And this is where you actually have to set the geometry column and the style column. Now because I used MI style, that's the one it's expecting, so it picked that up automatically. But until you do that, you know, I spent quite a bit of time fiddling around. Until you do that, you actually don't see map. Now I'm just hitting cancel now, and now if I close and reopen this, I'll see the actual map. So now that it's been spatially indexed, the map is all there. Okay. Okay, so that's databases, and I think shortly we're going to have another poll question. So just keep in mind, this is just walking through how you actually do that to spatially enable a table. So we're just a little bit curious how. I think the next question is that on database.
What databases you're using with your MapInfo products? Well, a big majority using file-based access or Excel.
Oracle's pretty good too.
Getting a race for Oracle and SQL Server. I'm going to close that poll in a couple of seconds. Last chance to vote. 3, 2, 1. We're going down, and let's have a look at those results. So, file-based access or Excel. So that's kind of interesting. A lot of people using MDBs there. So that they would have to use the MyTab reader to open that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then, are a lot of people using Oracle SQL Server and spatial, where fizzling out as people upgrade, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wonder what the other is.
Yeah, that'd be great if you can let us know.
Files, I suppose.
Yeah, or I don't know if there's any way to use. I was digging, but I couldn't find a way to use.
DB2?
Yeah, or some kind of open source stuff. Okay, I'm going to run through a couple. I won't have time. I don't have time to run this, but it's just to highlight that you can actually read with the open universal data. You can read GML directly, and in this case, a complex schema like Inspire GML can be read directly from within MapInfo. Of course, you can do that in a transformation as well. So that's a new reader that we have. So in the few minutes remaining, we'll just look at some examples of exporting data. First of all, well, here are a number of examples. We can do the reverse. We can go from GIS back to CAD. We can go from GIS to database, XML, and also to various consumer clients. So like PDF and KML. And the nice thing, I'm really going to emphasize the last couple points there, that the beauty of of exporting to something like PDF or KML is that it opens up the world of spatial and GIS data to a much wider audience. And so then all those beautiful maps you've made can now be enjoyed by your colleagues who may not have MapInfo. I'm not sure, do we have another poll?
Yeah, for people using FME Server. So we just want to see if anybody out there is... no, we don't actually have a poll created for that one. So,
okay, I'll just keep moving then. So just a few quick notes on Server, because this does relate to the export, as we'll see in a minute. Basically, Server is just an engine that allows you can take a workflow that you define on the desktop and publish it as a service. And that can be useful for data download, for data sharing, web services, or just automation. If your desktop's not that powerful and you want to publish it to a heavy-duty machine, can do that. We don't have too much time to go through all the details, but some of the classic uses are data download, which most people are familiar with. You could download to whatever format you want, file-based formats typically. But data streaming, that means you could stream to PDF or KML, and then also a common and growing use case is data upload. So you can upload data to FME Server and do validation, because without the validation, the upload's not that meaningful. And then job submitter is whenever you just want to submit a job to the server and have it crunch and generate the results. So let's look at this PDF example. So here we have a workspace that reads from. Now we're going from MapInfo and exporting to PDF. And what we want to do is essentially select based on a route number and generate a PDF as a result. So I'll run that workspace first. So this is the same workspace I'm bringing up. So again, reading from MapInfo this time and going out to 2D PDF. And just make sure I have all my data sources there. Okay. So the point I'm making here is that if we can run it on the desktop, then we can also export it to server. What I forgot to do here, a key part in terms of a published workspace, are which parameters you publish, because when you deploy this to a server, you're now offering this as a process that a wider audience can use, but they don't have to know anything about FME. They're not going to see FME. The only thing they're going to see is the published parameters. So while that's crunching, I'm going to go ahead and go to my server. So this is what it looks like on server. If I click on if I go to home here, I'll go log in again.
So this is the same workspace that you're running in the background, but made accessible to somebody who doesn't have FME installed on their machine, essentially.
That's correct. So here we are deployed on server and MapInfo to PDF. And so now the thing that I wanted to point out is that the only variable that we've published is this thing called tile name. So I can choose the overview slide, or I can choose a different value like that, and then I can just hit run.
So that request is sent back. In your case, you've got FME Server, I assume, installed on your laptop here, but in a real-world situation, that would be sent back to a server on some kind of server or virtual machine running, and that translation will...
and what I wanted to show here is that the same dialogue, how we prototype this is we publish parameters locally, and any parameter we publish locally automatically gets published on the server. So it's still crunching away there. And ultimately we get out, here's an overview map which shows all the bus routes. And so this is PDF. Everybody has Adobe installed, so it's very easy for people to get access to this output. And there is M25. So that's the one I just clicked on. So very cool. Simple, but quite powerful. And you know, not maybe you can do more with the styling, but I won't take credit. This is Aaron did this particular workspace. So
yep.
Anyway, all right. So now I won't have time to run too many more demos, so I'm just going to walk through in the last couple minutes we have remaining. Some of the transformation processes you can do with FME. I mentioned QA and schema transformation a number of times, as well as geometry transformation. So when you were talking about schema transformation, that's transforming the feature type names, fields, domain codes. And when we're talking about geometry transformation, that might involve generalization, like we did to smooth the contours in that raster import example, or it might be computing topology, or even ultimately generating 3D data from 2D. And in the CAD example, it's a pretty good one. I don't have time to run it now, but if you download that one, what it does is it looks for things like duplicate IDs or invalid diameter values or invalid geometry. And actually we have transformers to do that. I'll highlight tester as probably the kind of simplest and one of the most powerful transformers for things for validation. Schema mapping, like I said, feature type and attribute mapping, and I'll mention schema mapper is quite powerful. So if you want to actually have rules for if country equals Italy, set the language to Italian, you can use schema mapper for that. And this is just an example of generating complex XML output with FME. So we have a range of tools that allow, one in particular called XML Templator, which allows you to write to a specific application schema, in this case Inspire. So a few final words about MapInfo Considerations, and then we'll wrap it up. So there are some specifics around coordinate systems with MapInfo. You do have to be careful a bit about integer precision and what extents you define. And FME allows you to work around that. You can compute your extents with a bounding box accumulator, for example. Yeah, as I mentioned before, when you're writing to CAD or databases, often there's QA, geometry filtering required, and value mapper and schema mapper for data remodeling, and FME Server for your web services, and in general just deploying GIS data to make it more universally available. So in terms of what's next, you can contact sales for personalized demos if you have specific requirements or questions. There's a lot of tutorials online. There's the link to the webinars. So these webinars are usually recorded and you can replay them. If we were speaking too fast, perhaps you can set it to 50% speed.
Absolutely.
And we have one more.
So we have a giveaway here, or a little competition. If you'd like to get into a draw for complimentary FME training, we have one of those. So let's, if you want to put your name in, we're giving away 25 seats for FME online training. So if you if you, I guess there's a difference between yes and yes please. Those that say yes please win the draw.
As Canadians, we really value politeness.
So in a follow-up email, if you win that seat, then we'll put you in for an online training class, and you can look at the training calendar. So I'm going to close that poll now. I'm not going to share the results. It'll be a surprise as to who gets that in a follow-up email.
I don't know.
We had a few interesting sort of questions and observations. We're running out of time, I'm afraid, but I'm just going to run through these because they're kind of interesting. We did the poll on databases. A couple of people sent back, yep, we're using PostGIS. Somebody using a MapInfo alongside Esri products, SDE with Oracle. So I guess they must be using the Oracle spatial column and they're hitting that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. A recurring question about on the FME workbench, can we resize feature types so that we can see the entire full name of the feature types? At the moment, no, you can't, but I will tell you that if you want to see the full feature type name, just grab all the feature types, right-click, and add annotation and attached annotation, and that will give you the feature type name attached as an annotation right there, and you can see the full name. So that one's not a very long name, but on the CSV side you'd see that. And then questions about using extending MapInfo with FME. Does it use a license? Actually, Laura and I weren't quite sure of the answer for that. I think it probably will only use an FME license when you run that translation, but it might use the license while MapInfo is open. So we're not quite sure of the answer to that. We'll follow up on that question. But that was a good question about extending FME.
Okay, so we looked at a number of ways of using FME within MapInfo, how FME supports loading data into MapInfo, exporting from. All along we were looking also at how FME supports data transformation, both the attributes and the geometry and the various different geometry types like raster, etc. And then we saw a quick example of FME Server supporting data distribution and giving access to a wider community to your data. So just a quick word about resources. You got safe.com, the Workbench help, and Transformer help, which are always being improved. The readers and writers documents, which allow you to dig within the specific format requirements. I'll highlight the Transformer reference, which people don't always know about, so that one can be very helpful. And there's tons of stuff on FMEpedia, articles, examples that you can download, and then FME channel on YouTube. And not to forget support, so safe.com/support.
I think you've got all the links on the next slide there. And then also, certainly recommend if you are a core MapInfo user, looking at the presentation that Dean had mentioned earlier on from David Eagle at the bottom of the page there. David Eagle at One Spatial in the UK gives a bit more of a European perspective, I guess, because he's using, I think, largely UK Ordnance Survey data in his examples, but he goes into a bit more detail into some of the topics that Dean has covered here. So that's a well worth good recording to look at on the One Spatial site as well. And so, yeah, definitely, if you've got any questions, fire them off to info@safe.com. We're over time, so sorry about that. And so that's goodbye from me and goodbye from...
Yeah, from me. Well, thanks for your time and thanks for attending.
Thanks a lot, Laura, for answering and firing off answers to a lot of the questions there. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and have a good Canadian Thanksgiving that's coming up.
Yeah, enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.